All right, so you've got your app, you're ready to launch it. Huge step, congratulations.
Mhm.
But now comes another big decision.
Right.
How do you actually get it out there? So we are diving into the world of deployment today, specifically Docker Compose and Kubernetes. And you sent over this great document. It's called Deploying to Production, Docker Compose versus Kubernetes for Small-Scale Apps. And I'll be honest, I'm pretty curious myself about this. Docker Compose, so smooth for development, but is it really production ready, or are we getting ahead of ourselves? Do we need that Kubernetes firepower right away?
Yeah, it's a common question. There's no one right answer. It's like asking if you need a professional kitchen to make a sandwich. Sometimes simple tools are enough, but as your culinary ambitions grow,
Yeah.
you might need more specialized equipment. Try.
Okay, I love that analogy. So
Mhm.
for those who might be newer to this, can you remind us what Docker Compose is all about? What makes it so popular with developers?
Yeah, so Docker Compose, it's all about managing multi-container applications. Think of it kind of like an orchestra conductor. It uses a YAML file, sort of like sheet music, to define all the different services that make up your application. You know,
Yeah.
your web server, your database, your caching layer, all that. And then with a single command, Docker Compose up, it brings that whole orchestra to life. It creates and connects all those containers.
Okay, so it's like having that recipe that lists all the ingredients and then boom, the whole meal comes together. No need to like chop veggies individually or preheat the oven separately.
Exactly. It's that automation and ease of use.
Hmm.
That makes Docker Compose so popular for development. It saves a ton of time. Lets developers focus on writing code, not messing with configurations.
Okay, so clearly a developer's best friend during those late night coding sessions, but
Yeah.
when it comes to the pressure cooker of production, can Docker Compose handle the heat? Is it really a viable option for running live apps?
It can be,
Yeah.
especially for smaller projects or those with more specific constraints. But there is a trade-off. Simplicity versus scalability.
All right, so let's unpack that a bit. What are the real benefits of using Docker Compose in production? When does it actually make sense?
Well, the simplicity we talked about, it's not just convenient for developers. It also means less overhead in production. You don't need a dedicated team. Managing complex orchestration or anything, it's lightweight, boots up quickly, and it can be perfect for applications that don't demand massive scale.
So it's like choosing a nimble scooter for zipping around town instead of like a full-blown 18-wheeler that you only need for hauling huge loads.
Exactly. Think of like an e-commerce site with steady but pretty predictable traffic, maybe a small business, or a startup that's just getting off the ground. Docker Compose can handle that beautifully, uses minimal resources, keep things cost-effective.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But what if your site suddenly goes viral? Can Docker Compose handle that sudden surge in traffic? That's where things get a little trickier, right?
That is where we hit some limitations. Docker Compose is not really designed for dynamic scaling. You can't automatically spin up new containers if your server suddenly gets flooded with requests. So you'd have to intervene manually, which can lead to performance issues or even downtime.
Yikes. Nobody wants their site crashing just when they're going viral. So
Yeah.
in those high-stakes scenarios, Kubernetes is the go-to solution then.
Kubernetes, it's definitely the heavy hitter when it comes to scaling and handling complex deployments. It can manage thousands of containers across a whole cluster of servers, automatically distributing traffic, ensuring your app stays up and running no matter what.
Huh. Okay. Kubernetes sounds powerful, but I'm already getting a headache just thinking about the complexity of it. Is it really that much harder to wrap your head around?
Let's just say there's a reason why there's a whole ecosystem of Kubernetes experts out there. It has a steeper learning curve, no doubt.
So,
It offers incredible control and flexibility, allows you to fine-tune deployments, implement sophisticated rolling updates, manage complex networking scenarios.
okay, so if Docker Compose is our trusty scooter and Kubernetes is the massive 18-wheeler, is there a middle ground? Something with a bit more horsepower than a scooter, but without the intimidating size of an 18-wheeler.
You're in luck. There's Docker Swarm, which is like
Yeah.
a solid minivan.
A minivan. I like it. Tell me more.
Yeah, so Docker Swarm, it sits between Docker Compose and Kubernetes in terms of both complexity and capability. And the beauty is you can often reuse your existing Docker Compose files with Swarm. So the transition is smoother. You gain features like multi-host networking, so you can spread your app across multiple servers. Built-in load balancing for handling those traffic spikes.
So you get some of that Kubernetes level power without needing a PhD in container orchestration.
Exactly. It's a great stepping stone if you anticipate needing to scale up in the future, but you're not quite ready to dive into the deep end of Kubernetes.
That makes a lot of sense. But let's say for now, Docker Compose seems like the right fit for your app. Are there ways to make it a bit more robust in a production environment? Any tips for squeezing out that extra bit of performance and reliability?
Absolutely. Even if you're keeping things simple with Docker Compose, there are some best practices you can follow to make your deployment smoother and safer. For example, make sure you set up a proper restart policy.
Okay. Restart policy. Bring that down for me.
Yeah, so it's essentially a safety net for your containers. Let's
hmm
say one of your containers crashes for some reason. With a restart policy in place, Docker will automatically try to restart it, minimizing potential downtime. You can define this right in your Docker Compose file. It's as simple as adding restart.always or .restart unless stopped to your service definitions.
Ah, so it's like having that self-healing system, If one part of your app stumbles, it gets right back up and keeps running. I like it.
Exactly. Another crucial tip is to externalize your data using volumes. So this means storing your data outside the container itself, which has a couple of major benefits.
Okay. Why is that so important?
Well, for starters, it ensures data persistence if your container crashes or needs to be replaced. Your data is safe and sound on the host machine. No more losing precious data if something goes wrong.
Yeah, that sounds critical, especially in a production environment where data loss is a nightmare.
Absolutely. Plus, it makes backups and restores way easier. Since your data lives outside the container, you can back it up independently without having to worry about the container's lifecycle. And if you need to restore, it's just a matter of pointing to that external volume. It simplifies things immensely.
So it's like having a separate, secure vault for all your important files, instead of keeping them mixed in with the rest of your belongings.
Exactly. You're protecting your valuable data
hmm
and making your life easier at the same time. Win-win.
Okay. So we've got self-healing containers and externalized data for that extra protection. What other tricks do you have up your sleeve to make Docker Compose more production ready?
Well, security is paramount in any production environment. And with Docker Compose, it's crucial to manage sensitive information properly, like database credentials and API keys. Hard-coding them into your application code is a big no-no.
Yeah, that's like leaving your house keys under the welcome mat. Not a good security strategy.
Exactly. Instead, use Docker secrets or environment variables to store and access this sensitive information securely.
Can you explain a bit more about how those work?
Yeah, so Docker secrets, they act like a secure vault within your Docker environment. You can store your secrets there and then make them accessible to specific containers without ever exposing them directly.
So it's like having a safe within a safe, adding that extra layer of protection for those critical pieces of information.
Precisely. And environment variables, they're another option. They allow you to inject sensitive data into your containers at runtime. Keep it separate from your code base.
Okay, so Docker secrets or environment variables. Got it. What about the database itself? Any tips for managing that with Docker Compose in production?
One great option is to consider a managed database service, like Amazon RDS or Google Cloud SQL. These services take care of all the heavy lifting for you: backups, scaling, security patches. So you can just focus on your application logic.
That sounds like a huge time saver, especially if you're not a database expert. It's like having a dedicated team of DBAs at your disposal.
Exactly. And it can significantly improve reliability and performance.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground on Docker Compose and how to make it more production ready. But let's face it, even with all these tips and tricks, it's not a magic bullet. There will be times when you need to move beyond the simplicity of Docker Compose and embrace the power of Kubernetes.
That's right. And understanding when that transition is necessary is crucial for making informed decisions about your deployment strategy.
So how do you know when it's time to level up to Kubernetes? What are those telltale signs
Yeah,
that your app is outgrowing its Docker Compose setup?
there are a few key indicators, and we'll delve into those right after a quick break.
All right.
Stay tuned. And we'll be right back with more insights on Docker Compose versus Kubernetes.
We'll be back.
So before the break, we were talking about those crucial signs that your application might be outgrowing Docker Compose. And maybe it's time to start thinking about Kubernetes.
Right. It's like realizing your trusty scooter can no longer handle all the deliveries. And it's time to invest in that delivery truck. But what are those specific tipping points? When do you say, okay, it's Kubernetes time?
Well, one of the most obvious signs is the need for high availability. If your app absolutely cannot afford any downtime, we're talking mission-critical applications,
Right.
financial systems, e-commerce platforms during peak seasons, then Kubernetes' ability to manage redundancy and failover becomes essential.
So it's like having multiple chefs on standby, ready to step in if someone gets sick or an oven breaks down. No matter what, the restaurant stays open, the orders keep flowing.
Exactly. Kubernetes ensures that even if one server goes down, your app stays up and running, seamlessly redirecting traffic to healthy instances. Docker Compose, with its single-host focus, just can't provide that level of resilience.
Okay, high availability, check. What other factors might push someone towards Kubernetes?
Traffic patterns. If your application experiences unpredictable traffic spikes, think flash sales, viral marketing campaigns, major product launches, then Kubernetes auto-scaling capabilities become invaluable. It can automatically spin up new containers to handle the increased load and then scale down when things quiet down, ensuring optimal performance and cost efficiency.
So it's like having an elastic kitchen, It expands and contracts based on how many orders are coming in. No more scrambling to add extra ovens or hire more staff at the last minute.
Precisely. Kubernetes dynamically adjusts to your needs, keeping things running smoothly, no matter how unpredictable the demand is. With Docker Compose, you're kind of stuck with a fixed set of resources, which can lead to bottlenecks and frustrated users. If traffic suddenly surges,
All right, unpredictable traffic. Another point for Kubernetes. Are there any other scenarios where it just makes more sense to go with the more robust solution right away?
absolutely. If your application architecture is evolving towards a microservices approach, where you're breaking down your app into smaller, independent services, then Kubernetes becomes the ideal platform for managing that complexity.
Okay. Microservices. That's another one of those buzzwords we hear a lot these days. Can you explain it in simple terms? Why would someone choose that kind of architecture?
Think of it like this. Instead of having one giant monolithic application, you break it down into smaller, more manageable services, each responsible for a specific function. So you might have a service for user authentication, another for processing payments, another for managing inventory, and so on.
So instead of having one massive kitchen trying to do everything, you have specialized stations for each task. Prepping, cooking, baking, plating.
Exactly. And this modular approach brings a lot of benefits. It makes development faster, more agile, allows teams to work independently on different parts of the app, and it improves scalability and fault tolerance.
Okay. I'm starting to see why microservices are becoming so popular. But how does Kubernetes fit into this picture?
Well, Kubernetes excels at orchestrating and managing these distributed microservices. It provides that platform
Yeah.
for deploying, connecting, and scaling those individual services, handling all the complex networking and communication between them.
So it's like having a central control system that coordinates all those specialized kitchen stations, making sure the ingredients flow smoothly and the dishes come together at the right time.
Exactly. Kubernetes acts as that conductor,
Yeah.
orchestrating the entire microservices symphony. Docker Compose, on the other hand, is really designed for managing a single application stack on a single host. It's not really equipped to handle the complexities of a distributed microservices architecture.
Got it. So if microservices are on your roadmap, Kubernetes should be on your radar as well.
Absolutely. It's the natural choice for managing those intricate webs of services and ensuring that they all work together harmoniously.
Okay, so we've talked about high availability, unpredictable traffic, and microservices as key drivers for choosing Kubernetes. But let's be realistic. It's a powerful platform, but it does come with a learning curve. What are some of the challenges people face when making that jump to Kubernetes?
One of the biggest hurdles is understanding the core concepts and terminology. Kubernetes introduces a whole new vocabulary: pods, deployments, services, namespaces, and wrapping your head around all of those can take some time.
So it's like walking into a professional kitchen for the first time and being bombarded with all these unfamiliar gadgets and jargon. Sous vide, immersion blender, bain-marie, it can feel overwhelming.
Exactly. But just like mastering those culinary techniques, mastering Kubernetes takes time and practice. The good news is there are tons of resources available to help you. Online tutorials, documentation, community forums, even dedicated Kubernetes training courses.
That's reassuring. So even if it seems daunting at first, it's definitely a learnable skill.
Absolutely. Another challenge is setting up and managing the infrastructure for Kubernetes. It can be complex, especially if you're doing it all yourself.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's like building that professional kitchen from scratch. Plumbing, electrical, ventilation. It's a lot to handle.
Thankfully, managed Kubernetes services have emerged. To simplify this aspect, cloud providers like Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, they offer platforms where they take care of the underlying infrastructure for you, letting you focus on deploying and managing your applications.
So it's like renting a fully equipped professional kitchen space. instead of having to construct your own.
Precisely. These managed services can significantly reduce the operational burden and make it easier to get started with Kubernetes.
That's great to know. So even if you're not a Kubernetes guru or an infrastructure expert, there are ways to make that transition smoother.
Absolutely. And the benefits of Kubernetes,
Yeah.
especially as your application grows and evolves, can far outweigh the initial challenges.
All right. So we've covered the key reasons why someone might choose Kubernetes over Docker Compose, and acknowledged that it does come with a learning curve, but also highlighted the resources and managed services available to help ease that transition. But what about those who are starting with Docker Compose, but anticipate needing more power down the road? Is there a way to, like, gracefully evolve from Docker Compose to Kubernetes without having to rewrite everything?
That's a great question. And luckily,
Yeah.
there are strategies for bridging that gap. And we'll dive into those right after we take a quick break.
All right.
Stay tuned,
All right.
and we'll be back with more insights on navigating the world of Docker Compose and Kubernetes.
We'll be back. So welcome back to our deep dive into deployment choices.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about when to level up from Docker Compose to Kubernetes. But that transition, I mean,
Yeah.
it can seem pretty daunting.
Yeah, it's true. But think of it kind of like expanding your culinary skills, right? You don't go from making toast to running a Michelin-starred restaurant overnight. There are steps along the way. Okay, I like that analogy. So for someone who's comfortable with Docker Compose, what's like a good first step towards the Kubernetes world?
One strategy is to start by containerizing just one piece of your application and deploying that to a Kubernetes cluster. Maybe it's a non-critical service or a background task or something.
Okay, so dip your toes in the Kubernetes pool before diving headfirst.
Exactly. This lets you get familiar with the basic concepts of Kubernetes. Creating deployments, exposing services, managing pods, all that, without disrupting your entire application.
That's a smart approach. It's like trying out a new recipe. Before adding it to your restaurant's menu, you want to make sure it works.
Yeah.
And that your diners actually like it.
Precisely. And then as you gain confidence, you can gradually containerize more parts of your application and migrate them to Kubernetes. You don't have to do it all at once.
Okay, so that's a gradual approach. Are there any tools or techniques that can make this migration process smoother?
There are. One really helpful tool is called Compose. It can actually convert your existing Docker Compose files into Kubernetes YAML configurations. Whoa, that sounds like a game changer, so you don't have to rewrite all your configurations from scratch.
Exactly. Compose analyzes your Docker Compose file and translates those definitions into the equivalent Kubernetes objects, deployments, services, volumes, all that. It's not always a perfect one-to-one translation, but it can save you a ton of time and effort.
It's like having a magical translator that converts your recipe book from one language to another. You might need to make a few adjustments here and there, but the core instructions are all there.
Another strategy is to embrace a hybrid approach, where you're running some parts of your application in Docker Compose and others in Kubernetes.
So you can kind of have the best of both worlds, sort of like having a food truck parked next to your restaurant to handle overflow crowds.
Exactly. This can be a great way to transition gradually, leveraging the simplicity of Docker Compose for the parts of your application that don't require Kubernetes power, while taking advantage of Kubernetes. For those components that demand scalability, high availability, or complex orchestration.
Okay, so we've got a few strategies for migrating from Docker Compose to Kubernetes. Gradual containerization, using Compose for conversion, and even embracing that hybrid approach. But no matter which path you choose, there's one crucial factor that can really make or break your Kubernetes journey.
You're talking about monitoring, right?
You know it. It's like having a health inspector constantly monitoring your kitchen, making sure everything's running smoothly, and alerting you to any potential issues.
Absolutely. Monitoring is essential for any production environment, but it becomes even more critical with Kubernetes because you're dealing with a more complex system with more moving parts.
So what are some key things to monitor in a Kubernetes environment?
Resource utilization is crucial. You want to keep an eye on things like CPU usage, memory consumption, disk space, to make sure your pods have enough resources to function properly, and that you're not overspending on your cluster.
It's like making sure you have enough ingredients on hand and that your ovens aren't overheating.
Exactly. You also want to monitor the health and status of your pods and deployments. Are they running as expected? Are they restarting too frequently? Are there any errors or warnings in the logs?
So it's like checking that your chefs are showing up on time, that the recipes are being followed correctly, and that there are no kitchen fires breaking out.
Precisely. And you need to monitor the performance of your application. response times,
Hmm.
error rates, request throughput. Kubernetes provides a wealth of metrics and logs, but you need the right tools to collect, analyze, and visualize this data.
And what are some of those tools? We've talked about Prometheus and Grafana before. Do they play a role in Kubernetes monitoring as well?
Absolutely. Prometheus is a fantastic open source monitoring system, specifically designed for containerized environments. Like Kubernetes,
Yep.
it can collect metrics from your pods, your deployments, even the underlying Kubernetes infrastructure.
So it's like having a team of data analysts
Yeah.
embedded in your kitchen, meticulously tracking every ingredient, every temperature, every cooking time.
Right. And Grafana is the perfect companion for Prometheus. It lets you create beautiful, interactive dashboards to visualize all that data
Yeah.
and gain insights into your application's performance, health, and resource usage.
So it's like turning all that raw data into actionable insights, helping you identify trends, spot potential issues, and really optimize your operations.
Exactly. And you can set up alerts in Grafana as well, so you get notified immediately if something goes wrong, like a pod crashes, resource utilization spikes, response times slow down, things like that.
Yeah, that's crucial for maintaining a healthy and reliable application. No more waiting for customers to complain before you realize there's a problem.
Right. Proactive monitoring with tools like Prometheus and Grafana can save you a lot of headaches and help you ensure a smooth and successful Kubernetes journey.
Okay, so we've explored the whys, the hows, even some of the potential challenges of migrating from Docker Compose to Kubernetes. And it's clear that monitoring plays a critical role in making that transition successful.
Absolutely. It's an investment that pays off in terms of reliability, performance, and peace of mind.
Well said. All right, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into Docker Compose and Kubernetes. For small-scale apps, we've covered a lot of ground, from understanding the strengths and limitations of each tool to exploring strategies for migrating between them and the critical importance of monitoring.
We hope you've gained some valuable insights and feel empowered to make informed decisions about your deployment strategy.
Remember, there's no one-size-fits-all answer here. The best approach depends on your specific needs, your application's architecture, and your team's expertise.
But the key is to keep learning, experimenting, and finding what works best for you. The world of deployment is constantly evolving, so stay curious and embrace the journey.
Great advice. Until next time, happy deploying.